Hello, my name is Gabby and welcome back to my channel, or if you're new here, then welcome to my channel. And today's video I'm a little bit extra excited about because today is going to be my spoiler-free review for These Violent Delights by Chloe Gong. The content warnings for this book will be linked down below in the description, and let's just go ahead and get right into it. So These Violent Delights is a Romeo and Juliet retelling that takes place in 1920 Shanghai. There are rival gangs and a monster, and our main character has to team up with her first love and also first betrayal, and the two of them have to set aside their guns and their grudges in order to stop all of the mayhem. Let's go ahead and start this review off by talking about the characters individually, and then we'll go into the relationships and their dynamics. And let's go ahead and start off with Juliet. I mean, she's just great. There's a brief moment early on in the story where she's trying to analyze and figure out why her joke didn't land, and that's the point where I went from, I like her, to, oh, I have a favorite. She's also just super badass, and like what I'm about to say goes for all of the characters. But I love how morally gray she is, and we'll talk about this a little later on in the video, but I've been disappointed by so many books in the past that didn't take it to the level that this one does, and I appreciate this story for doing that. As for Roma, he's probably one of the few characters that I don't really feel an attachment to in this, but I do like him enough. Other than our two main protagonists, I also think this book has a really fun and really interesting ensemble cast, specifically with Kathleen, Rosalind, Marshall, Benedict. I feel like I got really attached to them, and I feel like they didn't feel flat or two-dimensional. I loved how they were utilized throughout the story, even when they weren't on the page or we weren't reading from their point of view. They felt like they had their own lives and their own jobs and just like their own stuff going on. They just felt like they always had a purpose, and yeah, overall, this is probably one of my favorite cast of characters I've ever read. Okay, so it's now time to talk about the relationships. This is a fun one because the relationship between Juliet and Roma is so interesting and complex. And I mentioned this when I talked about this book in my fall book recommendations video, but this story does really go out of its way to really hammer in that 1920s guns and grudges setting. They have some really cool moments in here, and I feel like that contributed to those, and it was just so fun, and all of the angst. It felt good to me. And I also do want to mention that I really like how they're exes in this. I feel like that dynamic added positively to the story and the relationship, and it's also something that I feel like I don't read a lot of, so it felt refreshing. And there's also another dynamic in here that I really like as well. As for the relationships between the gangs, this worked for me. Like I mentioned before, this story actually does let its characters do morally gray and even bad things. It's very eye for eye, there are grudges and high tensions, and all of this really gets infused to every aspect of the story, and I loved it. I also do want to talk about the setting because this does have a really complex political climate, and there's an author's note in the back that talks about the real-life history that the setting in this story incorporates, and that also includes the colonization and injustices that the characters face and discuss. This atmosphere and setting also does have a spookier side to it as well, and I thought that that paired really well with that 1920s guns and grudges setting that I mentioned earlier. And speaking of that, let's go ahead and get into the story. I originally had this book in my summer TBR, but I am so glad that it rolled over into my October TBR. Along with the spookier, more horror elements, there's also mystery elements in here. And seeing that mystery come together was really cool, and this is a story that also kept me guessing. I was on the edge of my seat so many times because, again, I was just really attached to the characters. But also just the plot of the story was a factor in that. I also thought this story had some really fun and tense fight scenes, and I sometimes zone out during fight scenes. That was thankfully not an issue for me with this one. The story also does have some body horror and scenes that actually had me kind of cringing away in a good way, which is always kind of fun in a sense for me, but it's extra fun in October. And just the way everything that I've talked about in this review, and even some stuff that I'm sure is just slipping my mind right now, I love the way everything in this book came together and really came to life on the page. It felt well thought out and complex. I'm so excited to continue on with this series and just see where everything goes. I also recently hauled Foul Lady Fortune, which also sounds amazing. But for now, this book is a very strong 5-star for me, and I do suspect that this series and this author have a lot more high ratings coming from me in the future. Okay, so that is all I have for today's video. Thank you all so much for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell, and answer the question that'll be around here if you want to do that, and hopefully I will see you here next time. Bye!